Hello everyone. Welcome back. We are going to talk about Aurica's last hymn today, Exec Renation. Renation is one of the last songs that we hear in the game. Not the last song, but one of the last songs. It's the first hymn that you hear in Phase 3 of the game. So if you're one of the people that didn't realize that there was much more after the credits, you probably never heard this song because the credits showing at the end of Phase 2 doesn't actually indicate the end of the game. It indicates the end of potentially your love interest route. And there's more going on. And nowadays, we know better than to get tricked by that. We have games like Near to thank for that, where the ending of the routes, they actually are played out linearly, rather than you load a previous save and play through the next route. But back in the days of Ars Nelico, that wasn't nearly as common. Different routes were things like in a visual novel, you chose a heroine and you went through with that heroine, and so the routes were played in parallel. So coming back and realizing there's a Phase 3 really depended on you picking the options that led to Phase 3 if you weren't already aware. Now, the options leading to Phase 3 are like, is this really how it should be? And so it's kind of obvious if you read between the lines, but it is still possible that you don't get that far. So the reason why Renation is needed as a hymn is to counter the effects of Suspend. So we'll talk about Suspend next. It's our next hymn that we're going to talk about. So the last couple of hymns kind of go in a weird order in that we're talking about them kind of all over the place, but we've been doing that kind of with all of these. So there's 3 hymns, 4 technically, I guess, if we include the ending song, that take place in Phase 3, but this one directly comes from the results of Suspend needing to be canceled. So when we talk about Suspend, we'll talk about that there's a big connection between the tower and its administrator. And so the administrator is the Origin Ravitel Shorelia. And in the game, we actually don't see her without her full armor on. So she's this mystical, powerful creature. She is, we think of her as this mature, armored fighter. And we don't realize that, well, yeah, she's 400 some years old. She is physically a 16-year-old girl, which is kind of funny to think about. But the idea is when the tower goes to sleep, so too does its administrator. And so because Mir has grown so much more powerful over the years of being sealed away, and Chronicle Key isn't working as well anymore, and I mean, Misha's decellophane was stolen by Tenpa, and now, there's, that's not even necessarily a reliable way to seal Mir away anymore. Shorelia decides to take it upon herself to sing Suspend and put the tower to sleep. Liner is not happy with this. Shorelia has been a mentor as a Knight of Alemia. She's believed in him when his own father hasn't really believed in him. As a parent, it's interesting to read between the lines with Laird and notice that it's not necessarily that he doesn't believe in Liner, just he has a really bad way of showing that he's really pushing Liner to be better than he is and to prove himself, and he's not showing it well. But Shorelia has always been the counterpoint to that, and really, really believing in Liner and being the counterpoint and saying, no, Laird, let's give him a chance. He can do these missions. He can do these things. And so Liner really feels like he owes a lot to Shorelia. And he certainly does. Shorelia has advocated for him a lot. And so he wants to wake her up. He doesn't think it's fair that she should never be able to experience the rest of life. And so, all the party at this point has dissipated and gone their own way. And, you as a gameplay mechanic, you actually go to all the different towns. There's about a party member in each town or so, and try to convince them to come back and look for a better way to deal with Mir that doesn't result in Shorelia being asleep for the rest of her days. And at first, it looks like it's not going to be something that is going to happen. Everybody kind of turns you down. But then they all kind of come back together, and it is revealed stuff about the big bad of the game, which you've already met, and the big bad not being Mir, but being Bishop False. And he has actually sealed the hymn crystal Renation away, and you go and you find Renation. Aurica volunteers to sing it to kind of rectify the wrong she did by singing Linger, and the tower comes back to life. And when that first happened, Shrilly is pissed. She's like, what are you doing? I sacrificed myself. Do you have a plan for dealing with Mir? And actually the party does come up with a plan. They do have a plan. We already talked about Harmonious, right? But at the moment she's like, what the hell? I made this grand sacrifice. This is the only thing I could think to do. you're invalidating everything. Like, are you really condemning Misha to sing Chronicle Key, which may not even work forever? And so it's kind of a funny moment if you look at it from the outside, but in the moment, like, it's very tense. The entire point of the suspend renation chain, this isn't actually the intended use of suspend and renation, because ideally there wouldn't be viruses, right? Mir, is the creator of all these viruses, and she, wasn't intended to be created to be this evil being, right? She was intended to be a tool to show how powerful Ravitels could be and to do what the humans wanted. And so then when she did turn evil and cause all these viruses, and that leads to a long chain of events that result in Chronicle Key being created and Purger being created and all sorts of things like that. Ideally, what would actually happen is, because the origin would be that the origin Ravitel, in this case Sherelia, would reach the end of her natural lifespan, which would certainly still be quite a few hundred years in the future, but it would not be forever. Sherelia is still a semi-biological life form. It's just an artificially created biological life form, and so she still would at some point die. And before that would happen, the tower would need a new administrator, because again, the tower and the administrator are linked together. When the tower sleeps, the administrator sleeps. When the administrator sleeps, the tower sleeps. So there cannot be a tower without an administrator. And so what actually is meant to happen is the tower would be put to sleep, and then there'd be a ritual to get a new administrator, and then the new administrator would awaken the old administrator with the tower and take over. So Renation awakening the tower without a new administrator was not ever meant to be like a thing. So this is a very unprecedented and unpredicted way to use these two hymns. But they certainly go together. So you can't talk about Renation without Suspend. You can talk about Suspend without Renation, because technically you could put the tower to sleep without awakening again. That's what Sherelia intended. Archanelco 2 actually was set off by Sherelia putting the tower to sleep. So, save one tower, doom the other, I guess. So I don't have my notes here because this song is really simple. Actually, there's not a whole lot to talk about. The structure is very straightforward. We have no key changes. We have no time signature changes. And I do have the sheet music to remind me of any features that we do come across. Once again, we are going to be in a major key. This time we're going to be in the key of D major. And I've mentioned, most of our songs have been in a minor key. Every time I've mentioned a song being in a major key, it's been like, wow, this is in a major key. And we've had a couple, so you might say, Callie, like, why are you so amazed by this? But remember, again, songs that are in major keys can sound actually obnoxious if they lean into it too hard. So if you notice, remember, we had Song of the Gentle Breeze was in a major key. It was a soft, solemn song. Renation is going to also be a soft, solemn song. The exception that we had was Linker and then parts of Purger. Only parts of Purger, right? So it was pretty balanced. There were some parts in a major key and some parts not. And then Linker, for being a more upbeat song, still was pretty subdued, right? It still was really balanced. It had a piano motif moving it along. The percussion wasn't too crazy. It wasn't like a crazy upbeat, like something like we've had, like Misha's Purger was very fast, very lots of moving parts. The tempo and the rhythm were both very complicated. So because of that more subdued nature, even in the terms of the technicalities, not necessarily the tone, it didn't end up sounding obnoxious. And so yet again, we have, for our third main major key song, we have the same thing happening here. So definitely a pattern that's definitely not coincidental. That is certainly something that happens when we have songs in major keys, that we want to make sure those major keys, the fact that we're in a major key and the sound that brings doesn't overpower what we're actually trying to do with the song and the sound that we're trying to get the song to have. All right, so we're going to take a listen to Renation and analyze the parts of it. But like I said, there's not a lot to analyze. So with Renation, there are only two vocal lines throughout the entire song. There's a melody and a harmony. For the most part, we are going to actually be in Japanese. There are two hymnos lines, Was Yara Wath Mi and Hum Renation. So Was Yara is how we start. So the emotions are, again, I am happy to be turned into a song. So again, we're expressing that same as the Was Yarachis Hymnos Mi. We're just changing the words again, this time to specifically mention that we're happy to let Renation be sung. So that's just a slight difference. And so that is the emotion that the song is having. But the hymnos part is not overlapping with the Japanese part and also only has 2 parts, a melody and a harmony. So for the entire song, it is only a 2-part harmony. Now there are like choir ahs in the background. I feel like that's more of an instrumentation thing than an actual, like if I were to say that this song would be performed in front of a crowd and I would have a backing track and then I would have the singers out in front. The singers out in front would sing the 2-part harmony and the choir ahs would be part of the back. It's because I feel like it's definitely more of a backdrop rather than a focus, which is different than pretty much all the vocal lines that we've had so far, where all the parts have been kind of in the foreground. Now, Ishibashi Yuko's songs have had some of those choir ahs in the back as well, so this song really does feel a lot more like one of her songs, but there are still differences just due to the inclusion of the hymnos lyrics, and there is a little bit more complexity in the harmony, rather than just coming in on a couple lines here and there in the chorus, a little bit of interleaving here and there, maybe the pre-chorus. It's much more consistent, and the instrumentation here I think is much more in line with the other hymns. So rather than having like a lute as a main instrument, which was shown with Ishibashi Yuko songs to emphasize that Claire is playing the lute, we have a more diversified set of instruments that we're going to have here. So with that all in mind, setting the stage, this is kind of like an in-between song between the hymns and the non-hymns, but it's serving a hymn purpose. Let's go ahead and listen to Renation. We're going to go part by part, but because the parts aren't that complex, I may not pause as often.
願わくばこの歌を呼び聞かせたまえゆるく吹く暁の風となりてまどろむ命これる夢に漂いて迷えぬ人解き放つ名前
I am going to pause there. That's a really natural place to pause. That was the entirety of the verse 1. The song structure is going to be verse, chorus, and that's it. So the chorus is obviously a lot longer and then there's a bit of a pretty long lead out of the song because we haven't covered much of the bar here. So as you notice, you heard a music box in the background, but we're going to get into full-on orchestra and we're going to get into the choir ahs. So having that full-on orchestra and gives a more diversified instrument set, which is why I'm setting this a little bit apart from some of the others. Okay. So a couple things to notice with this. So first of all, you can see it's just the 2 vocal lines. You notice I do have empty staves. What I did for the purpose of this song, just to keep things organized, the top 2 staves are the Japanese, and then I left the bottom 2 staves for the hymnos, but there's no overlap. They honestly, really, truly could be collapsed into one pair of staves. I do want to mention, this transition to bass clef is just how this program wants to do these notes. You could certainly keep it like this A below middle C here. You could certainly just keep this as treble clef. I don't know why I changed it to bass clef. That's what these symbols are. Treble clef we generally think of as, if you're playing piano, what your right-handed play. It's kind of the notes above middle C. And the bass clef is what you play with your left hand. It's the notes below middle C. But both of them, you have ways to write notes above or below their standard range. As you can see, plenty of these, there's an A below middle C, right? You certainly can play notes that way. So I'm not entirely sure why this was written this way. Other thing to note is all of the harmony here pretty much is written about a third interval above the melody line. Thirds are common, above the melody line not so much. We've seen it quite a bit in Aurica music. It's not as common in Western music as it is in international music. We are going to see it a lot in music here. When we hear higher parts, as I've mentioned before, like the sopranos in choir always got the melodies. That's what's stereotypical. So when you listen to this and those higher parts come in, when everything is played at the same volume on these MIDI files, it sounds like, wait a second, that's not the melody, because we unconsciously give priority when everything's the same volume to the higher pitch. But in the mixing of the actual song, the higher pitch part is at a lower volume so that the actual lower part, which is the melody, gets priority in our ears. So the balance out works, so the mixing of the volumes works really well in our favor for the melody in that way. So that's why that part and other songs that have those higher harmony parts have that little oddity where it doesn't quite sound right. We're going to hear that a lot in these. I don't have a lot of MIDI files left. It's just, I think it's the rest. So 2 more Artanelico 1 hymns, and then I have it for 1.5 Artanelico 2 hymns, and that's it. So we don't have a lot more examples of it, but that has been the case and will continue to be the case. Let's see here. There's again a staccato that I don't think is meant to be there. I don't know why the program I'm using here added that in. But for the most part, I think everything else, there's some oddities with some rests here that went in. There's a bit of a call and response on the E, no G, E, no G. That's a call and response. Call and response is when one, usually the melody, vocal part sings a line or a few notes or what have you, and then another vocal part sings another usually very similar, doesn't have to be identical. Here it is identical, kind of like an answer to the original call. When we talk about Exexphilia, the song is nearly entirely call and response, even though the melodies may not be 100% identical, simply because the number of syllables in the lines in the call and the response are not the same. But it does not necessarily have to be the exact same melody, but it should hold some similarity so that it's clear that it's meant to be a call and response and not I'm singing a melody and no, I'm singing another melody. And then the other thing I want to note is you see a lot of these holds. Right? So it's hard to both count and sing at the same time, as a piano can do. Let's see. Right? I can count the 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't sing and count. But notice our downbeat is our melody line is syncopated with our downbeat. So our downbeat is the first beat of every measure. So here I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, downbeat 2, 3, 4, downbeat 2, 3, 4. And so as I play that, we notice that mega wakuwa, we are actually holding a note over when that downbeat. So what that does, it does provide a little bit of syncopation, but notice it's nothing, absolutely nothing like what we had in Linker or Aurica's Purger. It is not meant to cause so much of contrast, but more of just this gentle swaying feeling. So rather than having just a boring, I'm on the beat every time, because at the beginning she's a cappella, and then it's just a cappella music box. If everything were on the beat, that could get very stale, because everything would be in unison. Unison means everything is doing the same thing. So by having just a slight syncopation, just a slight color, it feels a lot more natural, a lot more human, right? And the whole point is she's waking up the tower. You know, she is revitalizing and breathing life into something. So she's, you know, all of humanity is like, we need you, tower, like whatever. And so it really works really well to have that slight syncopation to give that, and to have that human feeling into the song. I know she's a Rave-a-Tail, but a Rave-a-Tail is like a human. All right. And then there's a lot of pauses. The most powerful thing, I've mentioned this, other reactors and analysists have mentioned this, a pause or a rest or a break or silence, whatever you want to call it, is the most powerful thing that you can do with a song. Because it's the absence of something. You're taking a break. You're creating a separator. You are saying, like, I'm not going to give you anything. You need to fill the void in your mind. And whether you fill that void with anticipation for what's coming, whether you fill the void with reflection over what you just heard, that is now entirely up to you as a listener to do. So it's taking that away and giving you homework as you're listening to a song almost. And that's why sometimes we like silence. I'm like, I'm holding my breath. I'm waiting for the beat to drop, right? And that's the big thing. Like in a really electronic heavy pop and K-pop songs, for example, the beat drop is so important. There's sometimes a pause and like, okay, the beat's dropped now. That's kind of, you know, it's almost an extended version of that here. Because the pause here before the chorus lasts a full 2 measures. And later on, that pause is filled by an orchestral run. And so that orchestral run is meant to be a something to build up to the chorus. But the first time, you don't know what you're building up to. You don't even know you're doing the chorus yet. You don't know if there's going to be a beat drop or anything. All we've had is some very gentle, happy, pleasant, content sounding vocals and a music box in the background. We've had a harmony line, only one harmony line. We haven't had much else. So we don't know what we're anticipating yet. And so right here is really powerful because there's a lot of uncertainty in this moment. And then when the chorus comes and brings together, it's got this, it goes, we move up when we come in, and then we have a slight descending melody. So we build up, and then we kind of let it fall a little bit. And so that we're going to have this rise and fall and rise and fall and rise and fall that really mimic our emotions. I know that sounds really pretentious, but it's true. It mimics our emotions as we're interacting with this media. Our emotions are rising and falling as we listen to the song, because we're getting this beautiful melody, and then it pauses and we don't know what's going on, and then the melody comes in, and then it almost sounds sad because it's descending. And so that mimic, it's really great imagery and it works really well. And so that's what's going to come next. The chorus. And so one thing I want to mention with the chorus is we're in a major key, but the chorus almost sounds kind of sorrowful at times. When we have a song and we have a chord progression, the chords that we pick could be major or minor depending on the key we're in. So we're in the key of D. Let's see, what key? I'm trying to figure what key would be. Let me go to the sheet music and maybe that will, I'm trying to do it by here. Sheet music. No, not that screen. No, it went away. I'm not sure I can get right back to where I was either. No. Oh, I can. So we'll listen to this here. Not entirely sure if that's the right harmony on that last one. It doesn't quite sound right. Anyway, so going back to chorus. So that is a B minor chord right there. And so because a good chunk, so we start in our tonic chord of D major, but then we transition to B minor. And we're in both of those chords for a good chunk. So we're in D major for 2 full measures. And then we're in B minor for, are we in it just for 1 measure? Nope, we're in it for 2 measures. And then we're in A major, and then we go back to D major. I think there might be another chord in there right before A major, but yes, Simba, I hear you screaming at me, meow. Want to come up here? But because we transition to B minor as our second chord, and we're in there for 2 full measures, and that is a good chunk of the descending back to ascending, that, you know, a minor key and a minor chord is a sorrowful sound. That is the whole point of, like, we always think of major key as happy and minor key as sad, and so that's part of what gives this chorus a little back and forth, as some parts are really vibrant and happy and some parts are really sad. And I bring this up because I wanted this song played at my wedding. I know that sounds really silly, but at least I wanted to, like, maybe make a piano arrangement of it to play at my wedding. And my wife said to me, "I'm not letting you. Why do you?" And then when she said no to this one, I picked some other ones, and she said no to those. And she said to me, I think Calafina's Fairy Tale was another one I picked. She's like, why do you want all these sad songs at your wedding? Like, weddings are happy. And, like, I never thought of this as a sad song because, you know, we're revitalizing the tower. I'm going to make this bigger or smaller. You know, we're revitalizing the tower. We are, you know, making, you know, we're doing something good. It's a hopeful, happy moment. I can't make that smaller. That's weird. But because of the way the chord progression is here in the chorus, it does actually have some sad parts, so I actually don't blame her for thinking that way. But it's not something that I actually thought about when I was pitching this song. I just remember the hopeful nature, and, like, I'm hopeful for the rest of our lives together to be wonderful too. So let's play this hopeful song on the piano, and apparently doesn't sound all that hopeful at times. I feel quite silly. But yeah. So as we look at the chorus here, so we now notice we are in thirds for the harmony again, but this time we're doing it below the melody, which is the more standard way that we do harmonies. This is the way that we hear it a lot in Western music, is thirds below. So that's very familiar. And the point where... And then again, there's the switch between treble and bass clefs. Again, that's just a convention. The way my program is doing this, all of this should be really in treble clef with just some notes below. And then down here is the hymnos part. And as I said, you know, as you can tell, there's no overlap with the Japanese lines. That could be included, and this could have been just a two staff arrangement, but just to keep the Japanese and hymnos separate, I felt that was really appropriate. When, you know, you heard the choir ahs in the background, they were definitely visible, but they kind of faded away a bit because the orchestra was doing a lot of the same chords and harmonies. And so the choir ahs kind of faded into the background strings. And so that's kind of the reason why it really doesn't feel like part of a foreground. Like if you were arranging this per performance, I don't really think those choir ahs would be something you would sing. Again, it really feels like something that is meant to be behind. And then when we do have the hymnos part here, not all the harmony anymore is in Thirds, we have some parts, it certainly starts out in thirds, but it doesn't stay, or this starts out as a third, and then it jumps. So we have what starts out, and then it jumps actually to a fifth. And then it goes kind of, it starts out at thirds then. And then I, for some reason, put that as a fourth. I think that's too harsh of a sound. I think that might still be a third there. But the interesting part of the harmony, besides that, what I think might be different, is this part here I want to note. The melody is going downwards, but the harmony is going upwards. So the melody, right? But the harmony, so you get a fifth to a major third. And so that's like a tightening. And so it really feels like you have this, a movement downwards at the same time of a movement upwards. And so they kind of cancel each other out. It kind of acts instead as like, I have this wide open, interval of a fifth that I don't know, is that a major or a minor fifth? I'm not playing the third in there. It could be either. We know what it would be because this is in the key of D, and in the key of D, that is a major chord. But to our ears, we're like, there's something missing in the middle there. But we're tightening it up by going to a third. And so even though one part of the melody is going downwards, we don't have that overall downward feeling. We have a tightening feeling. We have a resolving feeling. We have a positive feeling out of it. Where usually a downward melody actually acts kind of like a downer, like literally a downward melody. It has more of a negative or a pessimistic feel. Where it works really well in minor keys. And so that's also why when we had the part of the melody that was moving downwards or in the downwards direction, with that over on top of that being a minor chord, it really just emphasized that negative and more pessimistic potentially feeling, and maybe that's why that comes out so strongly. But because we're canceling it out here, it tightens it up and acts as a really good transition. It's like we're tightening it up and springboarding back into the verse. So it acts, we didn't have to use an accidental here. All our older hymns would have put an accidental in here as part of the transition. But because this is a more subtle, straightforward song that doesn't need all that embellishment, I keep using that word because that word just was used a lot in the translations that I looked at, and it just fits so well with some of these connotations. We instead can just move right on to the verse. And so the rest of the song is a copy paste from the first half. So we're just going to listen to the rest in the MP3 or the video with the lyrics. We're going to listen to the rest of the sheet music. The only thing that's different is we're going to have a fade out at the end of the hymnos. And then I've mentioned my feelings about fade outs before, but we're going to talk about them again here because this song is treated differently than a lot of the other songs in the series. The purpose of the fade out is a little different here, so I do want to talk about that. So we're going to go back to the video and we're going to listen to the rest of it.
輝う日目影差し響かせる歌はゆるく吹く黎明の風となりぬる生まるる命目覚めの夢に漂いて迷える人守らいたまえ
So as you can hear, it's fading out here, right? Like there's nothing to really look for. And I'm not going to go and repeat the sheet music because this time, again, it is just copy paste. There might be a few changes to just because of syllable count in parts, but there's nothing new and different. So once again, we had the music box, we had the vocals, the one line of harmony in places, we had the call and response. We had, this time it was a larger orchestral build into the chorus, unlike before where we had the longer pause with a smaller orchestral build-up, this time we know what to expect, and so we can anticipate it. And so they really wanted to build on that anticipation to the last chorus, so they emphasized that, like, they had a pause, we got our anticipation ready, and then they're like, I'm going to leech off that big orchestral, crescendo. Crescendo is when something starts, usually it's for volume, but a crescendo could really be for anything. You could have so a crescendo in volume is we start off soft and we get louder and louder and louder. But you could have like a crescendo of emotions, for example, when you don't feel something and then you feel more and more and more and more. And so they wanted, we have that small little, okay, I'm ready for it. And they wanted to like really make that so it's a crescendo of emotions in the listener, mimicking, the crescendo. And now all of a sudden we go from just a music box to now we have a full orchestra, right? And so there's a crescendo of instruments, you could say. Musically speaking, the exact crescendo, if you just hear crescendo on its own, it's always volume. But a crescendo in the actual vocabulary word, if you just look at it and take it away from its like purely musical context. And we are in a musical context, don't get me wrong. But like we use like the less than or equal, less than or greater than signs. We just extend them out across here. Let me use this book. Actually, this book might have more of them. For example, here we have examples of crescendos, and here I'm going to move this. Crescendos and decrescendos, sometimes we call them diminuendos, which are these long, here's a crescendo because we're getting louder, and here's a decrescendo or diminuendo because we're getting softer. When we just have a single, that's an emphasis mark. So that's not saying a crescendo, because you can't, on a piano, once you hit a note, you can't change how hard you hit it. Because to change volume on piano, it is how hard you hit the note. I'm very gently pressing, and now I'm smashing it, right? So once I hit a note, I can't change its volume anymore. Whereas in singing, once I hit a note, I can give more breath, or I can change where it's coming, like how far back in my throat it is and how much I'm projecting it, so I can. But that's the difference in those symbols. So if we just see those symbols alone always mean volume. But when we see the vocabulary word crescendo and decrescendo, we could actually be talking about literally anything building or dying down. It really depends, I guess, on the context and whether we're using a word or a symbol. But yeah, so we have that crescendo into the chorus. Chorus plays exactly the same. We have that one line of harmony throughout the chorus, and then we kind of go back a little bit, we get to the hymnos, and then the hymnos, it's just the hymnos with the music box again, and it's just that repeats and fades out. Now, the reason why I say this song is treated differently is because this song doesn't have a loop, which is interesting because this song has a perfect case for a loop, right? Like, we go back to, we're literally, like I said, we're copying and pasting parts. So it's really easy to just say, I'm going to go back to a previous part right to where I would have copied and pasted it. But this is treated more of a cinematic in the game, where, and we're PS2 era and not AAA. So, like, not a full-on cutscene, but, you watch her sing and the screen pans in different places, and so and there's some dialogue boxes or whatever, but it's not meant to be played. Like, you're not walking around, you're not getting in and out of battles, you're not spamming through text really fast to get through the song. You're literally stuck there for the song to play. And so when it fades out, I still, it's the fading out is not because we never wrote an ending because the song loops. That's not the case. The fade out is because we need to transition back into gameplay, and we want to do it pretty gently. So while the last couple hymnos parts are repeating, we're getting some lines of dialogue and plot is happening again, and we're transitioning away from the hymn being played. It could have just as effectively, we could have just had an ending and then the next part of the game would play, and we'd then have those dialogue boxes and we'd have the plot coming. It's just the desire to have a little bit of overlap to ease that transition from the song to the next part of the cutscene. And this is, I think, is this the first one that I think Suspend also has a cutscene, so this isn't the first time that we've had a song where it hasn't been looped. but it, that's the other way. Suspend also is treated this way, and so we're treating the opposite of suspend this way. So it has that parallel as well, which is kind of neat. But that's why the song fades out. Really, it could have just ended. Suspend ends, I think, if I'm recalling. It's been a long time since I wrote my notes. And Suspend is not on the songs I have on my daily rotation to listen to. But there are other cases of songs that, Phantasmagoria does fade out. So there are other songs where the song is played in its entirety. It's not looped, and it does fade out. And that's just a choice of the composer. I'm always of the feeling that if the song isn't supposed to loop, you should have a definite end to it. You're basically saying that you don't think the song should end. You don't think the song deserves to have an ending, and so now you're fading it out, almost like, or maybe you're too lazy to write an ending or what have you. But I think in some of these cases where the song is larger than, when you're just listening to it, like when you pop in a CD and you listen to a song, that's where the song lives. That's where, everything is in that space with you in that song. These are soundtrack pieces. They're meant to accompany something else. So the song is larger than just what we hear, what's on the CD. And so I think that gives it a little bit more freedom and leeway, because allowing for that fade out to have that transition into the next part of the cutscene, I think that was an interesting and good move, because, you're easing from one mode of game into the next, and it's always nice to have transitions in those spaces. I've never been a fan of like QTEs because there's no transition into the QTEs, and it's very jarring. It works when you're in a high stakes environment, but here you're just enjoying the music, man. Like, this is great. You're letting the tower come alive. You don't need to be on edge. So let that transition help you move on to the next piece, and let you stay in that pleasant space of mind. I do think that works really well. And so I don't think a lot of my hang-ups about how I feel about songs not ending and instead fading out like this are really relevant in a lot of these cases. Has nothing to do with the looping thing of the mechanics of how games work. All of our looping songs, by the way, have had endings, if you've noticed. And so that certainly wasn't part of the consideration here or in those songs. So I really think that was a purpose of it fading out instead. And I do think that works really well. And I think because we have to take the song alongside its context, alongside its purpose as supplementing something else, certainly we are putting it as a focus in these videos. And you can take these songs and you can put these CDs in your CD player. If you still have one, otherwise you can rip them because they're not on Spotify. You can rip them, onto your portable media, and Bluetooth them to whatever you're listening on. And then, you're listening to it in isolation. But if you've played the games, you still have that context in the back of your mind. So it's still living in, even if you've tried to restrict the space the song is taking up, it's still a bigger, even in that restricted space, it's still leaching out of the bounds you've put on it almost. And I know this sounds really weird to say in this way, but I think it's really important to remember that as we're analyzing this. Yes, we're taking a look at this from a very technical standpoint. We're looking at the notes, we're looking at the chords, we're looking at the time signatures, we're looking at the key signatures, we're looking at how the parts, the verses and the choruses and all those parts feed together. We're looking at how the song overall structure feels with the major minor key and the chord progressions and the instruments and how they weave in and out. But none of that really works and serves a purpose without the context of the game. The song would not exist without the context of the game. So we cannot take that away entirely. Which is why I've always been picking, when there is one that exists, I've been picking videos that have lyrics on them. I usually like the videos that aren't nearly as busy. They don't have a lot of visual elements because I don't want a lot of distractions from the song. So this one was, this was the only one I could find. This is the only video on YouTube of this song with English translated lyrics. But I thought it was really important to get those so that we could keep that context together, tied in. Whether you read the lyrics as you went through it or not, I thought that was important. So, what did you think? This was Aurica's last song. All of her songs were in Shimotsuki Haruka's very straight tone and vibrato tone, very pleasant tone. Very, very bright, almost childlike in some ways tones. I really like what she brings to this series, and I like that she stuck with Gus with like Atelier and some of her other contributions. So I'd love to know what your thoughts were as you got to this moment, and as we can reflect now on all of her songs. But we'll be moving on to Mitoshi Noriko's 2 songs next, and we do still have a B-side coming up from Shimotsuki Haruka. So we're not going to leave her forever on this CD, but we are done with her hymns. So we'll see you next time.